All right, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Here we got a Q&A going on today. Got a bunch of interesting questions from the Instagram poll. This is where I'm doing my Q&As for the most part. So if you want to participate in future Q&As, give me a follow on Instagram at basement.bodybuilding. And my goal with these Q&As, my goal with really any video that I make, is I want to try and teach my training philosophy, and I don't want to just give you like little bits and pieces of a more scattered, bigger picture. I want to kind of teach you how these puzzle pieces come together, and I want to teach you what I think, how I come to these conclusions, and I want to show you that I actually practice what I preach too. So before I get into the first question, I do want to give a shout out to Barbell Apparel. I'm repping their sweatshirt and their jeans in this video as I'm deadlifting, so you can lift in all their clothes. They look great too, so if you want to check out some of the stuff I wear in my videos, click the link in my description. With all that being said, let's get into the first question of today's Q&A. The first one is, do you regret not doing ab and oblique training sooner? And the more advanced I get, the more I realize this was somewhat of a mistake. So if you look at it from the perspective of I've been lifting for nearly a decade and I've missed all that time of ab and oblique development, yeah, it kind of sounds like tragic from that perspective, but when you think about it, now that I know how to train properly, I know what works to grow muscle, I'll be able to catch up my abs and obliques to the level of the rest of my physique. Maybe not quite, but I think I could do that in a much shorter time frame than it took me to get the rest of my physique to where it is today. So I'm okay with having my abs be a little bit more of a weak spot, but I think the point where they're at now, where they're kind of noob level compared to everything else, it is getting a little bit annoying, so I do plan on actually doing a little bit more ab training at some point pretty soon. Next question, what are your current fitness and life goals? So this one, kind of half fitness related, half obviously life related. So I'll start with the fitness portion. As far as my general fitness, lifting, bodybuilding goals and whatnot, I'd say my main thing is just to find out bigger picture what I want to do in the meantime with my body fat percentage and with my split. So I know it's a little bit vague, but that's just because my general goal is to continue to just build muscle. But I want to make sure I'm doing it in a way that is sustainable and maximizes enjoyment or positive anticipation towards my training sessions without it being at very much of an expense of my results. So if I could just, if results were equated no matter how you trained, I would just do a bro split. Like, I just find it really enjoyable, but I know just from firsthand experience and just understanding how muscle growth works, that training at that low of a frequency, it really isn't ideal, especially at this point in my training. Every time I try it, I spin my wheels, which is just annoying. So I don't plan on actually doing that because I still care about results ultimately. I mean, that's why I'm lifting. So if the results are no longer there, lifting becomes a lot less enjoyable. So how do I kind of combine the two? Well, I'd say the biggest thing is just figuring out what split I like most. And there's a handful of options I have now, and I'm just kind of experimenting with a couple different splits. Right now I'm on 4 times a week push-pull split with deadlifts and a little bit of leg work on the pull days. So what I want to figure out is how can I sustainably add legs and more leg training to that pull day, and is that a sustainable way for me to train, get good results, and train 4 days a week? Does that work? Is that something I'm going to want to stick to? So that's kind of my main thing. And another thing, I just want to figure out what body fat percentage do I want to be at for the foreseeable future? And of course, it's going to fluctuate because I do continue to plan on bulking and cutting after this somewhat prolonged maintenance phase. So my goal is really just to figure out when I want to cut, how much I want to cut, and then how far back I want to come up in that bulk. So in that process, I'm hoping when I cut back down, I'll be able to figure out what points of my physique are strong and what points of my physique need improvement. And then from there, I can start to kind of adapt my training towards whatever I think my physique needs in order to look balanced and look the way that I want it to. So overall, I wouldn't say I'm super concerned with aesthetics and everything. I really just enjoy building muscle, and I think it's fun. I think it's a cool hobby to have, so I'm always going to stick with it. But if I can kind of optimize things and refine things based on what I personally need, I'm happy to do that too. And as far as life goals go, this is kind of it's almost a tough question for me to answer because I've achieved all the goals that I had set when I was younger. And that's not to say that I'm exactly where I want to be for the rest of my life, but this is really the first time in my life where I'm pretty content. I wouldn't say complacent's the right word, but I'm happy with where I am, and I keep that perspective, and I don't keep setting the bar higher for really no beneficial reason. So I mean, if you asked me 10 years ago what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be, I would have wanted to own my own house, have a home gym, and be a fitness YouTuber. And it ended up working out. It's not something that I've just been like hammering away at for 10 years. I kind of started to mess around with it when I was in high school, and I took a little bit of time off of it to focus on in-person training at a few different places. And then I got back into YouTube once I had kind of given up on that, just purely as a hobby. And that's what I started doing a little bit over 3 years ago down in the home gym that you're seeing me training in this video. And I've been fortunate enough for it to work out and generate enough income to be a full-time job. So between coaching, which is obviously the main thing that I do on here aside from making videos, coaching, ad revenue, sponsorships, all that kind of stuff, it allows me to do this full time, and I'm just very content with where I'm at. I mean, it really is a dream job for me personally. Like, I know you'll hear all the time that you have to continue to aim higher and continue to make more money, and I think all that's great. And if you're somebody that can never really get content, it's fine to be chasing that. And I think it's a productive goal because it just improves what you can do for your family or your close friends. But I mean, I'm very content with where I'm at. So as far as life goals, it would I'm gonna have to slowly let those kind of unveil themselves. I can't really think of anything that I'd want to be doing right now aside from maybe figuring out my next living situation. So it will unfortunately come a day when I do sell this house and the legendary basement gym is no longer a thing. But it will come with kind of a bittersweet ending because I do plan on upgrading the gym at some point. So I want to figure out, and obviously this is going to be a conversation to have with Miss Basement, so we have to figure out how much land we want, how much money we can afford for the actual house itself. So how much money do we have to dedicate to a piece of land, and then how much do we have to dedicate to actually building a house, and then just figuring out all of that, and then what location is going to work for what we want, future family, what school systems are going to work for our future kids, all that kind of stuff. So just really just kind of transitioning from 20s into your 30s, and that's pretty much the extent of my life goals. Really just thinking about being content with where I'm at as far as the business quote unquote goes, as far as the YouTube channel goes, and as far as like me and my fiance, and then our future family, and kind of figuring out the start to kind of all of that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much it. I'll leave it at that for here. Next question, another somewhat non-lifting related question. You inspire a lot of people, but who inspires you? So I've been very much doing my own thing for kind of a while at this point, and I had a ton of inspirations when I was getting into lifting, and even before lifting, when my main thing that I'd focus on would be hockey. I've had a lot of inspiration, so definitely a bunch of NHL players when I was a kid. That inspired me to become, obviously, a better hockey player. Pretty straightforward there, nothing revolutionary or out of the ordinary. I would say people that inspire me now, I wouldn't say there's anybody that directly inspires me a whole ton right now, and it's really been like that for a few years. I've always had a couple people that I would look up to, but recently there hasn't been a whole ton. I really just have been going down my own path for a while now, and I wouldn't say there's anybody that I like directly am regularly inspired by. When I see competitive natural bodybuilders post on their social media, I tend to be very inspired by that. They're just doing it for their own innate love of bodybuilding and not for social media clout, and I think that's very respectable. So for as far as lifting goes, those are the people that I really like to look up to, the people that genuinely take it very seriously and genuinely love it too. That's very inspiring to me. You can kind of appreciate that as you spend more and more time on social media. You can kind of see who's real and who isn't, so that inspires me a lot. I would say the person that's inspired me most would be Alex Leonidas. He is, let's see, he started posting on YouTube a few years before I started lifting, but he was one of the first channels I found that really did have a big impact on the way that I viewed training and the way that I actually did train, so that was very beneficial. And just, it's more so just the way that he thought about training. He is more of a free thinker, and he views training in his own way. He asks the right questions, and I found that most other content creators kind of just fall into the fads and the phases of the fitness industry, so you kind of just get the same watered down answers from most of the bigger channels, or most of the more mainstream channels at least. So to see somebody like him that was doing rack pulls and talking about like full body twice a week when it was in the frequency phase 7 to 10 years ago, it's like that was the stuff that that I always found very helpful. And one of the most inspiring things that I still take from him to this day is he doesn't just tell you what to do, he explains the why. In my entire channel, the reason I make any video isn't to tell people what they should do or what you can do for the best result. It's this is what I think is this is what I think is the best, but this is why I think it. And I spend all of my videos going on the why. So if I just told you what to do, I could make my entire channel on TikTok or Instagram Reels, but I'd rather talk about it for 20 or 30 minutes and make sure people actually understand what I'm talking about, so they don't just have to remember it like a flashcard, they have to actually understand it. So that's kind of yeah, I would say that's my philosophy with my channel, and I think I've got a lot of that inspiration from somebody like Alex Leonidas. All right, next question. Do you think maintaining an RDL between mid 400 to 500 pounds is sustainable, or should I go for a technique reset or a technique fix? So, of course, the elephant in the room here is, how does your technique look? And of course, this is a Q&A, so I can't look at how this person's technique looks. But what I would say is, generally speaking, if you're deadlifting, or if you're doing a Romanian deadlift in the mid 400s range, or anywhere in between 400 and 500 pounds, your technique isn't going to be super clean, and it's kind of just impossible to maintain super strict, controlled, very clean technique with like a perfectly flat back and perfectly balanced weight distribution throughout your feet. Like, this isn't something that's just going to look like the same lift as when you're doing RDLs with, say, 315 or something. So it more so just comes down to, one, how does your programming look, specifically in terms of frequency? I find that to be the most important of the bigger variables when it comes to something like a hinge. And obviously your proximity to failure, your volume, all this stuff is very important too, but a lot of that is going to be dictated by the frequency at which you train your hinges with. So I've found in my personal experience, training moderate volume hinges to a very close proximity to failure twice a week, and when I say very close proximity to failure, usually 0 to 2 RIR, maybe 3 in some cases. I find that doing that twice a week, it's pretty tough on the joints, it's pretty tough on recovery, so I do try and generally keep hinges at once a week. If you're not quite as strong, then twice a week can be a little bit more viable. So what I would say, beyond just general programming stuff, do you prefer to train with stricter technique or a little bit looser technique, and what makes you want to train hard? How does the rest of your program look? I find that the guys that love to train with looser, little bit more momentum, cheat-oriented lifting, which when you're doing it properly, it can work very, very well. And I'd say that's kind of the way that I train, at least to an extent. If that's how you train everything else, it's going to be potentially a little bit tricky for you to get excited for doing your hinges in a very strict fashion. And same kind of goes the other way around. If you love to be a little bit more strict, if you're being a little bit looser with form, it's just not going to feel right. You're going to question everything. You're going to question the standardization of your range of motion if your back was rounding. So it's just not really going to work. So what I would say is, big picture speaking, lifting between 400 and 500 pounds once a week on an RDL, it's totally sustainable, and you can do that long term, and that shouldn't be an issue. As far as if you should go down and wait and do a technique reset, I'd say it mostly comes down to preference, or just how fatiguing is that 400 to 500 pounds? Do you have a hard time executing the rest of your workout after that? And if so, then I would probably go for a technique reset and be a little bit stricter. But if you feel like after that set or sets of 400 to 500 pound RDLs that you can train the rest of your session totally fine, then I would probably stick with it. I mean, why not? Next question, how did you develop the sense of knowing when to stick to a weight or go up in weight on a specific lift? So before I answer this question, I do have to backtrack a little bit and go a little bit bigger picture so you can kind of grasp the reasoning behind the answer that I give to this one. So, in my opinion, if you want to become a truly advanced bodybuilder or lifter in general, you have to be somebody that understands these two things. You have to understand your instincts, as in your survival, self-preservation instincts, and you have to kind of accept and understand that your brain is going to be fighting against you, and this is the reason why you don't want to push yourself hard. It's because it's uncomfortable. Your body doesn't want to expend all that energy. So you have to understand that you are fighting against your own survival instinct that has been wired in our brains and our ancestors' brains for thousands, millions of years, whatever it is. You also have to understand your gut feeling about training and how hard you have to train in order to get results. So what I mean by this is, you get some people that say, well, actually, keeping a couple reps in the tank in literature has been shown to produce better results. But if I was to say, okay, well, whatever it is that makes you comfortable training a little bit less hard, whether it's the literature saying that you can leave a couple reps in the tank and make better gains that way, or make equal gains that way, or whatever it is, or if it's like a leg extension gives you better quad growth than the squat for X reason. So whatever it is that is something you're actively seeking out that can almost justify you not training quite as hard, one of the best ways to kind of test that and test how truly you believe that is to do something like the example that I'm going to give is a little bit extreme, but I can give a more practical one in a second here. So let's say if I came up to you and I said, you have 6 months left to live, or rather than myself, say a doctor said, you have 6 months left to live, random disease X is going to kill you in 6 months, unless you build, say, 95+% of the maximal amount of muscle that you are genetically, that you have the genetic potential to build in a 6-month span. So if you achieve 95% plus of that genetic potential over 6 months, then you will survive. Do you think you're still going to be saying, oh, well, maybe I should do the leg extension instead of a squat pattern like a leg press, hack squat, or barbell squat, or I should be training with a few more reps in reserve because it produces the same results? Or do you think you're going to say, okay, well, my gut feeling is that you have to do this in order to make gains? Then that will give you a good test of your theory. And the more realistic example I'm going to give here is, let's say you enter a bodybuilding show where you're going to be judged on your physique. That puts a lot of pressure on you. So you could even tone that down a little bit more and put it into a more practical situation for the average lifter. So this would be something as simple as just taking progress pictures or recording measurements, and you put that test to yourself. When you know you have that deadline of taking progress pictures or measurements, you are going to train the way that your gut tells you you should train, and I think that will take you a very long way. So to get back to the initial question, how do you develop the sense? That's how you do it. You develop the sense through that. So you have to figure out how hard you are willing to train, and you have to kind of put yourself in that position first. Make sure you're somebody that is willing to go all out, and you have to make sure that your sense doesn't push you way too far or hold you back. And then you can kind of just, from there, you can kind of just get a general instinct on things like stability, things like the resistance profile, and this is why some bro lifters can have pretty successful lifting careers, where they don't understand the first thing about anatomy, let alone like progression schemes, or even more complex stuff like biomechanics or resistance profiles. They don't understand anything about that. So why can those people become successful? Well, it turns out their instincts and their gut feeling is right a lot of the time. It's just their reasoning that's wrong. And that's kind of what I try and do on my channel, where you get so many people that say, okay, well, in order to get big, you have to get strong on the compound movements, and that progressive overload will drive growth, and having a big bench will make sure you have a big chest. And things like the arms and delts, they respond better to high reps and pump work, and that's how you grow everything. So what they're saying is correct, but their reasoning and their logic is incorrect. So when somebody says you have to, progressive overload drives growth, I've already talked about how it's actually the other way around. It's growth causes progressive overload. So when you have a big chest, you will have a big bench, and those things are going to be correlated. So therefore, that is my logic for the size for strength correlation. And then when people say things like arms respond better to pump work, well, you look at the lifts that they do, their tricep pushdowns and dumbbell or barbell curls. Well, those are not very stable lifts. So if you add weight too fast, like you would on a compound lift that has more stability and a proper opposing force, then you're just going to lose stability, and you're going to have other limiting factors in that movement that prevent you from going too heavy. So they innately stick to higher reps because they know it feels better, but they're just confusing the reason for the growth from that style of training with like things like the pump or higher reps. It's not high reps on the pump that cause growth. It's just going to be a side effect of trying to push hard on a lift that you have less progressive overload potential on due to a lack of stability and opposing force. So I'll leave it at that for that example. Hopefully that makes sense, and I'll move on to the next one here. So next question, how much stability is enough to make gains? So the simple answer to this one is you just need to have enough, you need to have enough stability to where your growth, which causes progressive overload, doesn't get you so strong to where you lose your technique due to a lack of stability. So that point is only going to hit on specific lifts. And when I say only specific lifts, I don't mean it's rare or uncommon. I would actually say most of the more popular conventional style lifts actually don't have that great of progressive overload potential simply due to the lack of stability. It's never because a certain muscle is like too small or too weak, like you hear a lot of people say. People would say, oh, well, you shouldn't focus on progressive overload for the biceps because they have no progressive overload potential. Same thing for the side delts. It's like, well, please explain that. It doesn't make any sense. The real thing that they're trying to explain here is that the lifts that they're using for the biceps and their side delts don't have good stability. And ultimately what happens here is once you get to a certain strength level, or you get to a certain weight, or even just weight lifted relative to body weight ratio, at a certain point the stability starts to become a limiting factor in some fashion. And of course it's only going to get worse over time. So when people talk about progressive overload potential on a lift, this doesn't mean strength potential or potential for strength output. So like a bigger lift that involves more muscle groups, like a compound lift like a deadlift or something, that doesn't have better progressive overload potential because there's more, say, 5-pound increments as you generally progress, or because that's the heaviest lift you can do in the gym. That's a decent range of motion. It's not because of that. It's because the lift is highly stable, because you're pulling in a direct opposition to the ground, and no matter how hard you try, you're never going to be able to shift the ground. You can never push the world away because in all likelihood gravity is stronger than you in just about all cases. So stability is obviously going to be very important for that reason, and that's why, especially for stronger lifters or say intermediate advanced guys, or at least on certain lifts that you are starting to become strong at, I do advocate for more stable variations. So when I advocate for a preacher curl and then people in the comment section tell me, oh, it doesn't matter, just all bicep curls are the same, I'm like, well, wait till you're more advanced and you're going to start to see the differences here. So stability is very important. It's especially important for the muscle groups that are kind of more socially accepted to train through lifts that are less stable. And this is why I don't think we've seen maximum potential size in, say, the arms or the delts. Even like the calves, I think most people don't train stable enough lifts. Like I would say even a standing calf raise for somebody that's brutally strong, you're not going to meet your full potential until you do a calf raise where the weight's loaded at the hips rather than the shoulders. You don't want to have your entire hips, core, spine all exposed in a movement like that where you have to put max force output with a ton of weight. So without going super nerdy on this one, I think that generally starts to, I think that will generally makes sense for most of you here. So basically have an opposing force, and more stability is usually not a bad thing unless the resistance profile kind of sucks. And if you want to learn more about resistance profiles and how that works, you can check out, I would check out my rep ranges video, which was the second most recent video posted, so the one right before this. And then I would check out a video titled The Ultimate Guide to Resistance Profiles, or something along the lines of that I posted a year or so ago, and that will kind of explain my philosophy behind resistance profiles, as well as, of course, how they work, most importantly. So, next question. All presses go to delts, small chest, no mind-muscle connection. This one is a fairly simple fix. So, if you look at the conventional ways, or at least in recent times, people love to talk about the lats. They're going to say, all right, well, the lats leverage the rib cage in order to generate tension. And that's true. And all you have to do is basically just apply that exact same philosophy to the pecs. So for your lats, if you want them to wrap around the rib cage, you want to have your shoulder packed down so your humerus is low and the lat can wrap nice and tight around that rib cage. If you're doing a row or a diagonal pull, a vertical pull is going to be a little bit different here. But if you look at the pecs, you kind of just have to do the same thing. If your rib cage is tapering down from your lower pecs all the way up to your clavicles, then you want to keep your pec fibers down low so they're wrapping more around your rib cage and they have more leverage, and they can use the rib cage for leverage. So this would be something as simple as just cueing yourself to a practical cue here is to drive your armpits down. Like what I like to think about is drive my armpits almost down to my nipples. And what this will make you do is it will make you depress your scaps, pull your humerus down and kind of draw your clavicles down the most that you realistically can, or at least make sure that they kind of stay tight, nice and low. So this makes sure your shoulders don't slide up and you're losing tension on your pecs. Really as simple as that. So keep your shoulders packed down, depress your scaps. If you want a practical cue, like I said, drive your armpits down when you're doing your presses, and this should help you quite a bit. Next question, non-lifting related. What are your top 3 works of fiction? So I am somebody that I respect the opinions of critics to a certain extent, or at least some of them, but what I would say is I find it very boring when people are too obsessed with critics and they just use critics' opinions for their own opinions. So instead of saying, all right, what were the 3 things that you have the fondest memory of, or the 3 music albums that resonated most with you, they just say, okay, well, my 3 favorite albums are the ones that the guy on YouTube said were the most popular, so I'm gonna go with those. And my favorite rapper is Kendrick Lamar. So you get what I'm saying here. So for my personal top 3 works of fiction, I'm just gonna keep it to movies and shows because I haven't read enough. So I'm gonna list them off here. Off the top of my head, I would say the piece of fiction that sticks out most to me, if I had to think of any movie, show, anything, it would be Jaws. That's my favorite movie. I've absolutely loved it since I was a little kid. It was terrifying when I was 5 or 6 or whenever I first watched that movie, but it's a classic. It's so well made. The actors are excellent, and it's a fascinating and very captivating movie, and it has a good pace. I'm not a movie critic, so I'm not going to be able to articulate this as well as somebody that's into that stuff would expect of somebody talking about this stuff. So Jaws is the first thing that sticks out to me. I would say two other shows that I really liked would be The Walking Dead, and obviously this one is this is probably the most classic example of a show that just started off really strong and gradually kind of sold out and got worse. The first few seasons of The Walking Dead were excellent. I was incredibly captivated, very interested, and I was very just fascinated in the whole concept. And I think it's just something that's such a wild concept to kind of wrap your head around. Just if the world went apocalyptic, it's for some reason I'm very interested in that kind of stuff. And what I love most about the show is it isn't. You can say this is like the most fictional, unrealistic show ever made, and it's hard to argue that. But what I would say is the acting and the way the show was written, the human response was realistic, and I found that fascinating. It was like if that hypothetically that situation of a zombie apocalypse was to happen, would the way that generally speaking people behaved in that show, would that behavior and that what they did and their strategies and their behavior be all that different than what would actually happen? I don't think so. Of course, some stuff is played up to make the show more entertaining and more dramatic, but I don't think it's all that far off from how people would respond in a situation like that, and that's what I find most fascinating about it. I would also say, if we're just talking works of fiction as a whole, I have been very captivated by the entire Yellowstone series. I thought the show Yellowstone was very good. I wouldn't say it's like the best thing I've ever seen or anything, but it's beautiful, and I think it's very well written. And then the prequels I do think are fascinating. 1883 I thought was great. I finished that about a month or 2 ago. It was it's tricky because I think just from like an artistic perspective, they make it a little bit slower paced to almost play up how slow of a pace of life was, or at least traveling back in that era was. And I think it almost makes you feel like you're kind of there. You're going at the slow pace, like, all right, this is taking forever, and that's only a fraction of what they had to go through back then. So I found that very interesting, even if it was kind of boring at times. Then 1923, I haven't finished that. I'm about maybe 70% done with that show entirely. And I think that's kind of their masterpiece so far. I think all the storylines are excellent, and I think it's that sweet spot in time where it's not so old, it's not modern day, it's that sweet spot, happy medium. It's just fascinating to see something like that historically accurate from 100 years ago. I think it's very interesting. So those are my top 3. I'm not saying they're the most critically acclaimed or best made or whatever, but just as far as captivating me and intriguing me, I would say those are the 3 that stick out to me most. Next question. how do you come up with new training concepts so often compared to your peers? And do you... Oh, I think I forgot to screenshot part 2. So, I guess this is part 1 to a 2-part question, but this is a complete question, so I'll go ahead and answer it here. So how do I come up with new training concepts so often compared to my peers? Well, I would say I don't necessarily come up with new training concepts. I kind of discover what is already there and refine it based on the questions that or based on the conclusions that I come to. So it's not necessarily that I'm doing anything new or revolutionary or different. What I find is that I just come to slightly different conclusions, or at least my logic or reasoning is different than what I find the consensus or the fad to be at whatever time I'm learning about something. So I think one of I have a lot of weaknesses, obviously. Like, just psychologically speaking, we all have flaws that we have, and I have a bunch of them. But one strength that I do have is my ability to kind of separate myself from the crowd and not be swayed by popularity or consensus of a certain topic. And of course, that hasn't been I've still fallen. I don't want to say victim, and I know I said this in the last video, but I know even somebody like myself still did eventually kind of fall to the fad of power building and some other random fads in the fitness industry. But what I would say is I am very unsatisfied with just knowing what I don't want to know what to do. I want to know exactly why it works, because I want to be able to make proper decisions. So if somebody was to say, well, you have to be strong in order to be big, and look, hey, all the strong guys are big, so just get strong. Well, that doesn't lead me to making excellent decisions across the board when it comes to training, especially over the long run. So I want to figure out, all right, well, why does X work? Why does this training variable work? And is this answer that I'm being told from the fitness industry actually fundamentally sound from a logical perspective? And I find a lot of the time it is not. It's really just the social proof and the amount of likes or engagement a certain topic gets. It kind of validates a lot of things needlessly, or I should say improperly, and we kind of just accept that just because a popular person says something or a lot of people agree with a certain thing, that maybe it doesn't need an explanation. And I just that it almost rubs me the wrong way. So I like to think about things for myself. I like to experiment, and I like to try and answer difficult questions that a lot of other people might not be willing to ask. And I think that's how I come to some unique conclusions when it comes to training, that I am able to actually explain and give reason behind. And I think that's part of the intrigue of my channel and my training philosophy. Next question: struggling to progress on the overhead press. What are your best tips for this? So I've got 2 main tips for you. The first one is a practical exercise selection tip. So what I would say here is just start doing some behind the neck press. You can do this standing with a barbell, you can do it seated with a barbell, you can do it standing in a Smith machine, you can also do it seated in a Smith machine. You can straddle a flat bench with no back support. This can be a little bit easier from a mobility perspective, or you can use back support, which will lock you in a little bit more, but it does give you a little bit of extra stability. So either way, I like all of these variations. I don't think the added stability is a total difference maker. So if you want to use a standing behind the neck press, or even just a seated one without back support, both of those are excellent lifts, and they can all grow your side delts very well. So what this will do is make sure that your elbows are all the way flared out, because you have to get the bar behind your head, and this will make sure that you're training humeral abduction, which is a prime function of the side delts, and this will make sure they're not being overshadowed with more tucked elbows by, say, the front delts or even the upper pecs and traps to an extent. So this will make sure you're getting a good side delt stimulus. So whether you do a little bit of extra work on behind the neck press in your current program, or you just rotate one of your lifts to that, at least temporarily, I think that could go a long way. Another piece of advice that I'd have for most people is to go a lot lighter on your lateral raises and your rear delt variations. And the reason for this is because the lateral delts are they're just a weak muscle. They're really not very strong at all. So while you can go heavier on these lifts, there's always going to be other muscle groups contributing as you go heavier. So this is a lift where you do want to get more out of less weight. So on this, what I would try and think about is creating distance between your humerus and your rib cage. That's the main function of the side delt. You don't have to have perfect technique to grow your side delts perfectly, but if you find that your overhead press is starting to stall out, that can be a symptom of your delts not growing. So you're going to want to make sure they are the prime mover on these lifts, and you want to make sure they're ultimately getting to failure, not having other muscles start to take over right as they get a little bit fatigued. So what I would do here for your lateral raises, keep your abs tight, keep your ribs down, probably use 50% of the weight that you're using right now. Like, it sounds insane, but I genuinely do recommend that for a lot of people. Your reps might be a little bit higher, it might feel very light at first, but it will be a very hard set. You'll get a much better pump in your side delts than you ever have with sloppier technique, and that doesn't mean everything, but it is going to be correlated with good stimulus generally speaking. So I would keep your ribs down, keep your abs tight, create a ton of separation between your humerus and your side delts. I mean, not your side delts, between your humerus and your rib cage, and that will make sure your side delts are working very hard. The next piece of advice that I have for you is film these and hold yourself to a very high standard. The way they feel and the way they look are two completely different things, and if you want to have an honest look at how things are, film your sets, and that will show you a lot. The way you perceive your technique to be when you are under the pressure of performing during a set and you're enduring a lot of pain, your perception's not going to be perfectly accurate when it comes to technique. So film your sets, take a look at technique, and you should be good. Next question, will you make a power shrug video or traps video? So a while ago I did make a power shrug video. It's bloated and it doesn't really cut to the chase. It's just like some general kind of philosophy on the traps. That's from a long time ago, around when I started the channel. So I do want to make another one. It probably wouldn't directly be on power shrugs, but I do want to make one about the anatomy of the traps. I find that is one of the hardest things for people to learn. Not because it's like complex or difficult, although it is a slightly more complex muscle group than most others. There's just not a whole ton of content on it, and I find most people just don't understand trap function and anatomy all that well anyways. They kind of just think traps play somewhat of a role in rows, and they shrug up. So I do want to make a video kind of talking about the function of the traps and the anatomy of the traps, and just that way we can make sure that everybody's growing them optimally, because they are a muscle group that will add a ton of aesthetic to your physique. So that's it for that question. You can expect to see that video at some point. If you do want to see it, leave a comment on this one, and I'll make sure I'll put it in a higher urgency if that turns out to be one that you guys do want to see. So next one, any difference between regular preacher versus caber preacher station moved to lower cables? So the only real difference here would be just the fact that so gravity on a cable, and I don't understand physics perfectly, but I understand the concept of resistance profile. So what I'd say here is, when you're doing a barbell preacher curl, or an easy bar preacher curl, however you want to say it, gravity's everywhere. So wherever the bar is, the gravity that the bar is enduring is going to be directly horizontal. When you're doing something from a cable, their quote-unquote gravity, aka the force of the cable that's pulling you, is going to be coming from the pulley itself, so the cable origin. So it doesn't shift back as you curl, so cables aren't constant tension like a lot of people like to improperly say in the fitness industry for whatever reason, but they do provide a little bit more of a flat resistance profile than something like a free weight. So it's not constant tension, but there is generally going to be a little bit more tension along the other areas of the movement. So that's really the main difference. There are other smaller differences that are just a little bit more nitpicky here, so I'm not going to even bother going into them. Next question, 6 to 10 sets is the best volume. By this I assume you mean weekly. It tends to work really well. It's really hard to argue that there's anything better than that for the majority of people, so that is generally going to be what I suggest for most people, but there definitely will be cases where it's going to be a good idea to put some muscle groups at slightly lower volume if they grow well with lower volume, or if they're just a slightly lower priority. There's going to be a lot of cases where you actually have to use higher volume, but I would say most people should be able to make gains for a very long time in 6 to 10 sets per week, and there will be certain cases where you have to go above or below, and it's kind of just as simple as that. But there isn't really there's going to be no best volume range that is always the best. It's going to vary throughout your training career. Next question, how much variation is too much? The simple answer to this is, if you're losing focus on your lifts, or your attention is just spread too thin, and you feel like you're not locked into a specific lift and you're not holding yourself accountable to doing a certain lift consistently and measuring your progressive overload over time, then you have too much variety. So I'm not going to be able to give you a concrete number on this one. So don't look for a specific number here, but yeah, generally, people that do too many variations, it's just quantity over quality. You can train them all as hard as you want, but it's going to be hard to focus on a specific lift and buy into a specific lift and get hyped for a specific lift. It's going to be hard to master something when you have to dedicate so much effort to other variations throughout the day or throughout that week. So happy medium is always going to be best on this one. Next question, experience and thoughts on muscle memory. This is something I'm going to go through my experience here. Anytime where I've lost muscle, so whether it's temporarily from getting sick or just taking a more extended time off of training, which I've only done once or twice, but for more significant periods. One was 3-ish months, the other was 6-ish months. Muscle comes back. It absolutely does come back very quickly. It will vary based on how hard you're training, so you can't just kind of like do half-hearted training after a layoff and then expect to get everything back, but it does come back pretty easily and it does come back pretty quickly. So I am a huge believer in muscle memory, and this is why I'm not afraid to put certain muscle groups on maintenance. Like I've absolutely lost size on my quads, and I'm not worried about it whatsoever because it'll probably take me a month or maybe 2 months tops to get them back to like their maximum potential size that I've already had them at. So I'm not really concerned at all about losing a little bit of muscle or having a muscle on maintenance that I'm a little bit inconsistent with. To me, it's just not a huge deal because I know how quickly I can get it back just from my previous experiences with taking advantage of something like muscle memory. So I absolutely think it's a real thing, and I think you should use it to your advantage rather than worry about losing muscle. Next question, what to think about when switching to a new gym. So the biggest thing here, you're going to want to make the transition as smooth as possible. So rather than switching to a new gym and trying out every new machine that they have, it's going to be very tempting, but what I would say is keep your program as much the same as you possibly can. So let's say you went to like some average, maybe medium to small, just kind of generic commercial gym for a very long time, and then you're like, all right, well, I'm going to drive to the next town over that has this massive bodybuilding gym with a bunch of fancy machines. It might be very tempting to try out all that new stuff on day one, but if you want to make the best gains possible, what I would suggest is keep your program 90% the same and pick 1 or 2 new lifts to try out. And this way you can make sure that you are kind of going through the motions, not in terms of effort, but going through the motions in terms of being in the routine and the rhythm that you're already in, and you can just dabble in learning new things. If you're trying to learn a bunch of new things all at once, it's going to be really tough to get into that rhythm of training. It's going to be super awkward. It's going to be a lot psychologically, and it's just going to be a crappy month, maybe 2 months of training, trying to learn a bunch of new stuff, learn technique on all these new machines and everything. So take it slow, there's no rush, and from here you can slowly, maybe once a month, you can just add in another 2 new lifts if you want to try new stuff out. And this way you just make sure you're not changing everything all at once. So do you have to follow exactly what I said? No, you're free to do whatever you want. I think you'll ultimately be fine both ways, but if you want to make sure your gains stay as consistent as possible, try and make that slow, I can't even speak right now. Try and make that switch as slow as you can. But I would still say you want to make sure you're taking advantage of better equipment. If something is objectively better, just don't do it all at once. Next question, what are your future plans for lifting, and do you plan to lift for the rest of your life? So for the second question, yes, I do plan to lift for the rest of my life. This is for both aesthetic and health reasons. I think it's very healthy to be strong across your entire body, obviously, and having a good amount of muscle mass is also very, very good for your health, and just the act of lifting itself is very good for your health as well. So for those reasons, I think it's almost a no-brainer to continue to lift for the rest of my life. I can't say I will lift seriously forever. I could see myself doing that into like my 50s and 60s and then probably toning it down after that a little bit. But as far as future plans, here's kind of what I'm thinking, at least bigger picture. And this has kind of been the plan that I've been leaning towards for probably a couple years now. So I'm in my mid approaching late 20s. I'm 26 right now. I plan to probably by 30 start to maintain a leaner body fat percentage. I do still plan to bulk and cut, since I still am going to have muscle to build in my 30s, at least my early to mid 30s. So what I'll plan to do is, instead of cutting to 17% and bulking to 21, 22%, I'm probably going to cut down to 13 or 14% and then bulk up to 16, 17, maybe 18%. But I do want to be leaner as I get older and as I kind of approach my most advanced physique possible. I don't think I have to be in a super high body fat percentage to milk every possible ounce of gains out. But I don't want to limit myself by staying too lean. But I want to be at a point where I'm leaner and healthier. I also want to be at a point where I'm realistically closer to my potential, and I can kind of afford to be a little bit leaner and start to kind of reveal the gains that I've been making throughout my late teens and throughout my entire 20s. So that's kind of that's kind of what I want to do there. And another reason why I want to do that is because with the gains presumably slowing down in the future years, in my, say, 30s or so, I do think I want to make lifting more enjoyable. And to me, lifting itself, the act of lifting, while I am very interested and intrigued and kind of like fascinated in it with like almost like an analytical and nerdy sense, I think just to make the act of lifting more enjoyable, what I have to do is just lean myself out a little bit so I can see the muscles working, I can see the pump. To me, that's just very fascinating and it's very enjoyable. It's one of the only short-term gratifications that I can find in bodybuilding. So if my progress is going to be slower, I at least want to be able to look at the sick pump as I'm lifting, right? Next question. Lateral and medial heads steal the work from the long head in every movement. How can I fix this? This is one of the most simple fixes there will ever be, but it is one of the most difficult fixes to implement, and this is something I have a very, very hard time getting people to be able to do. And it basically comes down to being a mobility challenge, and everybody is going to be able to do it, at least to varying degrees, but it is going to be something that is much more difficult than it sounds, and that's really just what I'm trying to warn you with here. So basically, if you want your long head to work, I'm going to assume that you're talking about overhead extensions here. The long head will quote-unquote shut off when your elbows flare or track forwards. So the best thing to focus on here is making as big of an angle as possible between your spine and your humerus. Ideally, you're going to want them to be in a straight line, aka have a 180 degree angle there. So you want your shoulder to flex all the way up at 180 degrees. You want your elbows to be pointed up directly at the ceiling when you're doing your overhead extensions. And I'm going to be blunt here, 90% of people are not going to be able to do this without good stability. And when I say stability, I mean back support. You're going to have to do them seated with back support on a seated stationary bench. So you can talk about cable overhead extensions. That can work for some people. I find for myself and most other people, the lack of stability causes the form to fall apart, and no matter how much you try and focus on keeping your elbows up high, it's just the mobility becomes the limiting factor. I find in a lot of cases the elbows start to flare out and or forwards, and the lateral and medial head of the tricep starts to take over. So what you're going to want to do is, first off, get back support. Find a seated stationary bench. If you prefer the cables for whatever reason, you can bring it to the cables. That's totally fine. I would say the most underrated variation is using a narrow grip easy bar overhead extension. And think about leaning back into the bench. If you have like a little foot bar at the end of that thing that you can jam your feet into and just use that as leg drive, that helps a ton. So please try and use that bench. If you have the hammer strength bench, the seated stationary one, please go ahead and use that. And let your elbows, let the weight pull your elbows up and back like you're trying to stretch the long head of your triceps as much as you can. And from here, this is, yeah, it's going to get you a stretch, sick, whatever, who cares? The stretch is all right, but it's not a length and bias resistance profile anyway, so it's not too huge of a deal in my opinion. What I would say is, just from a biomechanic standpoint here, the long head of the triceps is biarticular. So what this means is that it works on both the shoulder and the elbow joint. So the reason why the elbow's tracking forwards or flaring out is not so ideal for long head development is because the long head will lengthen as you lower the bar or lower the rope on the cable, but if your elbow comes down, you're also shortening it at the shoulder. So what happens here is it doesn't actually travel through all that much distance, while the lateral and medial head get all of the range of motion. And if they're already taking over anyways on the vast majority of your lifts, then and your long head's lagging behind, yeah, it's going to try and override the long head in every movement that you possibly do. So you have to override that. You have to work to bring up that weak point, and then you will be fine. So I would do overhead extensions, and one secret hack that nobody talks about, pullovers are incredible for the long head of the tricep. Get a full ROM pullover. The lateral and medial head are not working. It's just the long head. Yes, the pecs work to a slight extent, and yes, the lats are going to work a decent amount on these, but the long head of the triceps absolutely will grow. The lats aren't going to be super strong in that position anyways, so it's not like it's a secondary mover on a lat movement or something. I really do think the long head of the tricep is a prime mover on a dumbbell pullover. So please do your pullovers. I wouldn't do them standing with a cable. I do them lying on a bench, or at least across a bench is my preferred setup with a dumbbell, and that will get the long head of your triceps growing. Next question. Thoughts on TikTok vaulting normal incline presses for upper pecs. So my brief thoughts on this one. When you're at the bottom of an incline press, is your humerus near your clavicle? I wouldn't say so. And then at the top of an incline press, is your humerus near your clavicle? I would say yes. So how would that not work the upper pecs? I'm going to leave it at that. I don't like TikTok. Next question. Stretchy movements first or contraction focused movement first in a workout? So I'd say the most popular training philosophy regarding this is going to be Jordan Peters' approach, where he likes to do the short bias stuff first because it really only fatigues the short position, and then you can go into the lengthened bias stuff after that. So do that subsequently and you should be fine. You can smoke the entire range of motion for that target muscle. So this philosophy makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of hard to argue against it. The only argument that I really have is just I personally am a believer that the length and bias stuff is going to be building the most muscle. You look at any time-tested staple lift that people talk about all the time and have used historically and never really has, it's never been a fad or anything, it's really just a staple in bodybuilding or lifting in general. They're pretty much all length and bias. Like, people make fun of super short bias stuff, and maybe they'll do them a little bit, but they call them accessories at best, right? So length and bias stuff is going to be the big hitters, and what I would say is you're going to want to do that in a fresh state. At least I am, so I do that first, and then my contraction focused stuff I do after that, and just take it to failure in a more fatigued state. So it's really just as simple as that. I wouldn't say myself is, I wouldn't say either myself or Jordan Peters is right or wrong. I really do think it mostly just comes down to preference, and that's really the extent of my thoughts on that. And this last question, this is kind of just a fun one here. So in a world without the internet, would your training be similar to now, or has online knowledge influenced you a lot? Could you have reached your current level through experience alone? So what I would say is most of us tend to take, because there's so many charlatans or bad influencers or unnecessary fads that are counterproductive in the fitness industry, we tend to focus on all of kind of the wrong things and all the problems in the fitness industry. But when you look at it bigger picture, and I can say this for myself, I don't think I would be near where I am today without YouTube fitness or social media in general. I've learned so much, and like, if I look back to, say, like the best natural lifters that I've ever seen or trained with at any gym ever, I can't think of anybody that's even close to advanced. I mean, I've had a lot of big and strong training partners, but nobody that would like the big and strong guys that I've like seen their intensity on Instagram or YouTube or whatever. Like that's the stuff that teaches you. Social media just gives you so much more exposure to such a niche thing, and I think it helps you so much. So who knows? Like, could I have been one of those people myself? I definitely wouldn't rule that out. I think I could have been, just because I do have such an obsession with lifting and everything. But if I never had that person to kind of look up to, or that person to be inspired or motivated by, would I have been able to get to where I am? I can't say for sure. So to me, it's somewhat of an unknown, but I think I would have learned a lot on my own, but I don't think I would have had so many opinions and so much information that I could process and think about and draw my own conclusions on, or other people's advice that's really good that I was able to put directly into my own training and get better results from it. So who knows? I personally do not think I would be on the level that I am without social media. And I think a lot of us take it for granted. So you can talk all the trash you want to about social media, YouTube fitness, whatever, and just say a lot of it's clickbait or useless, or it's purposely confusing, or people are just making content to make money and whatnot. And it's hard to deny that that exists. But I would say in the vast majority of cases, there's a lot of really good, really helpful free information out there. I'm trying to be one of those people too. And yeah, I'll kind of just leave it at that. But I think social media fitness is very valuable, and that's why I partake in it. Anyways, that's all I got for today. I will see you guys in the next one.